are just plain loopy and dispossessed. I have never had to deal with a case as a shop owner refusing to give change unless a purchase is made. If that is the most harrowing, disturbing and malevolent experience of your life, please accept my most sincere congratulations. Naturally, if you have a matter dealing with the federal government, I'd be only too happy to hear from you. So you figure if a big margin wants one or two here or there. It was, obviously on a much more serious note, one of the greatest privileges of my life, apart from being born an Australian citizen, with an Australian passport, living in a free and independent country, being a parent, having the opportunity to train and practice as a medical practitioner in this country. It was the greatest privilege of my public life to serve the people of Brakefield and serve in the federal parliament as it is now for just over 13 years. It was even more so to be a part of a team led by John Howard and Peter Costello, which undertook the economic and social reconstruction of Australia. We took this nation from one which had been accustomed to deficits and deficit budgeting and the accumulation of debt. As you know, $96 billion by the time there was a change of government in March 1996, facing in that first year a $10 billion deficit. To take Australia to being one where in November 2007 we were able to hand to Mr Rudd and his colleagues a country with a $22 billion surplus, no Commonwealth debt, and more than $60 billion invested in Australia's future. It was a privilege to be a part of a government where, as John Howard, I recall, shortly after the election of the government and the tragedy that was Port Arthur, came to our party room, where we met in Canberra, we meet every week, where there were many of my colleagues who quite legitimately were opposed to national gun control, where John Howard said to us, he said, in my then 23 years in public life, he said, what I'm about to say to you contravenes everything I've ever believed. He said, we're going to have to pass laws to control the lives of people who have done no wrong and never will. We're going to have to tell the states what to do, which is interesting when you think in hindsight where we ended up in 2007. He said that in my 23 years in public life, I have never been more convinced that this is the right thing to do. And so began a government that went about that economic and, as I say, social restoration of Australia. The courage of Peter Reith on the waterfront. The changes to workplace relations in 1996 and 1997, which introduced, amongst other things, Australian workplace agreements. The changes to the taxation system and the introduction of the broad-based consumption tax in the form of the GST and the abolition of 7 other taxes led by wholesale sales tax. The emancipation of East Timor. The introduction of choice, an affordable choice for Australians and Australian families in health and in education. The steadfast defence of membership or non-membership of an Australian trade union. We saw down the economic crisis in Southeast Asia, the collapse of HIH and OneTel and Ansett, of SARS, the US recession of 2001, the response to terrorism, the things that we did to protect Australia's borders, because we knew that it wasn't just about Australia's sovereignty, it was also about the protection of an already overexploited group of people that were being exploited by people smugglers. The major reforms to higher education, which I was able to play a role in as Minister for Education. The changes to schooling, and David, I can tell you that we not only sent the materials out about the history and nature of the Australian flag to every school in the country, I made it a condition of funding that every school will fly the Australian flag. And where that came from was that I was visiting a relatively modern, very well-resourced public school in southwest Sydney. And as the principal proudly took me around the school and showed me the various facilities, I asked, where was the flagpole and the Australian flag? And the principal replied, she said, well, we're a multicultural school here. We have students who come from 53 different cultural backgrounds. And I said, well, in that case, why can't the school be a bit like the UN, have a flag from all of those countries, but have an Australian flag which flies above them all? I went back to Canberra and said, right, we need to fix this. And that is one of the things that I did. I also learned, as Ralph Waldo Emerson observed 160 years ago, that character is higher than intellect. And as Benjamin Franklin also observed, that our freedoms are in direct proportion of the conscience of men to exercise judgment in relation to what is right and what is wrong. And that is why I believed very much that the teaching of values in Australian schooling was no less important than the fundamentals of reading and writing and effective communication. We also were a government that implemented welfare work to encourage jobless sole parents in particular back to education and training, because we knew that their children were 3 times more likely to continue that cycle. Those and many, many other reforms I am immensely proud, and particularly the present decision taken by John Howard in 1996 in consolidating the finances of Australia to not cut the budget of the Australian Defence Forces, to improve the efficiency of that expenditure, and in hindsight, in my opinion, that was the most present and important decision that John Howard took. I understand at the time against the advice of almost all of his senior colleagues. I've learned many things throughout my life, and one of the things I say to young people, in fact, when I was president of the Australian Medical Association, I was asked to deliver again an oration to the College of Physicians in 1994, and they'd asked me to touch on a number of themes, and one of them was success. And I made the conclusion that success in life depends on 3 things. The first is to have an open mind, to always listen to what other people have to say, to be prepared to test your own views against those of others, and those who close their minds do so to set themselves up for failure. The second is to protect and nurture the inner integrity of your own intellect, to allow you to develop ideas and then argue your case to challenge and change the thinking of others. And the third, of course, is the humanity with which you deal with others. And so too, having been born in 1958, I'm probably a member of the last generation of Australians who grew up with a mesh of values that would be summarised as God, King and Country. When I began my schooling, we sang God Save the Queen. When I finished my schooling, we were moving on to other things. And so it was in 1994, which was a seminal year in my own life. It was in September that year that I made the decision